The afternoon in Atlanta's upscale district had taken on a strange stillness. The last rays of sunlight spilled through the towering windows on the 36th floor, casting a pale golden hue over the clouds drifting lazily across the sky. In his mahogany-shelved reading office, James Hall sat before the blinking green interface of his full home security system. Outside was warm, inside it was cooling fast. A chill arose from something that had just broken the air with a whisper, quiet like a warning bell before a storm. "You have a camera in your office," the voice drifted in low, as if coming from far away. "But it isn't yours." James froze. His hand hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. He didn't turn, he didn't speak. His eyes remained fixed on the screen, where lines of code pulsed like a racing heartbeat. Then slowly he turned. There was no anger in his gaze, only the calm of someone realizing they had been watched. At the doorway stood Leslie Beck, one shoulder leaning against the frame, her large black eyes unblinking. A 10-year-old black girl in a grey hoodie, her hands clinging tightly to the desk edge, like an anchor. "Leslie," James said, but it wasn't a greeting. It was a test. She took a step forward. Her worn shoes made almost no sound on the expensive carpet. She came closer now, only an arm's length away. Her breath was still warm as she whispered, "The camera's behind the painting Shelley brought." For the past 6 months, since the car accident that had taken her parents, James had taken Leslie in. She had barely spoken and only observed. She moved through the house like a shadow, a silent outline on the wall. Now her voice had opened a chapter. A warning. A beginning. James stood and walked toward the painting, Shelley's gift, which he had thought was a celebration of his success, a moody cityscape. He lifted the frame. Behind the smooth, polished backing, he spotted a tiny black dot, no larger than a pen tip, glinting as he tilted his head. A camera, ultra-small, planted with intent. James turned back. "Leslie, how did you know?" She hesitated. "I saw it blink at night, then checked it with my tablet." James was speechless. Leslie wasn't just a child, she was a potential hacker. In that moment, life changed. James was no longer in control. Leslie was no longer the silent child. 2 people, 1 secret. And countless challenges. The story had begun. The room fell silent. The abstract painting now lay tilted on the floor, one corner of the frame chipped, as if it had just been stripped of its false front. James Hall stood still, eyes locked on the hole behind the canvas. Inside, a pitch-black camera lens glared cold silent, like an artificial eye that had watched every private moment of his for weeks. Leslie Beck sat quietly in the leather chair by the desk, hands clasped, eyes fixed on James. She said nothing, but in her gaze was something like, "I knew you didn't." James stepped over, carefully removing the camera from the wall cavity. The device was sophisticated, too professional. He turned it in his hand, heart pounding, not just from the betrayal, but from the bitter truth the person who planted it was Shelley Shaw, the woman he had once thought he'd marry. "When did you find out?" he asked, low and raspy. "Last week," Leslie whispered. "I wasn't sure if you'd believe me." James swallowed hard, her words cut like a small, deep wound. He had been too distracted by Shelley work and everything else to notice the girl silently watching it all. "You did well," he said, eyes still on the device. "Keeping that secret wasn't easy." Leslie nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. That night, James couldn't sleep. He activated every layer of his estate's security system. Under the blue glow of the control screen, he sifted through access logs and camera heat maps. Something was off. Some cameras had recorded motion at 3 a.m. when he and Leslie were asleep. In the living room, in his office, even his bedroom. He rechecked the system's configuration. Weeks ago, Shelley had offered to help him tidy up the office. At the time, it seemed sweet. Now it was dangerous. James didn't just feel watched, he felt violated. He called one person Stephanie Ramirez, the longtime housekeeper who had been with the family since his parents' days. "When did Shelley come into my office when I wasn't there?" James asked directly. Stephanie, with experienced eyes and a calm demeanor, didn't hesitate. "At least 3 times. She said she was cleaning, but she always lingered at the bookshelf behind your desk." James thanked her, then returned to the office. He tapped the wood panels gently, listening for odd echoes. He found 2 more devices, one beneath the desk, one in the ceiling disguised as a smoke detector. No more doubts. Shelley wasn't just observing. She was hunting. The next morning, James took Leslie out for breakfast at a small midtown cafe, their first outing. She chose the seat by the window. Sunlight poured through the glass, turning her curls golden. "I'm sorry," James said suddenly without preamble, "for not listening to you sooner, for trusting the wrong people." Leslie didn't look at him. She stirred her hot chocolate and said, "I don't blame you, I just don't know who to trust." That hit James like a punch to the chest. James decided to act. He called Reginald Villarreal, a former special agent and now a high-level security consultant who had once helped him design his internal security system. "I need you to sweep the house every inch, every device," James said. Reginald didn't ask questions. They found 5 cameras, 2 microphones, and 1 signal repeater 3 hours later. One of them was in Leslie's room. James nearly clenched his fist until it bled. "This is military-grade equipment," Reginald said. "No amateur gets their hands on this." James exhaled, not weakly, but with fire in his eyes, the fire of a man who would no longer be passive. That night, Leslie didn't sleep in her room. She stayed on the office sofa with James. The 2 sat side by side, watching the computer screen as Reginald traced the signal from the estate. "It's forwarding to a server outside the city," Reginald said. "Looks like a small storage company downtown, but it's heavily encrypted." James stood still. What was unfolding wasn't just betrayal by a woman. It was a campaign, and Leslie, the child he had vowed to protect, was now in the middle of the battlefield. She sat there, gaze steady like a warrior. No fear, no surrender, just waiting for her uncle to act. James placed a hand on her shoulder. "From now on, I won't keep anything from you. We're going to figure this out, together." Leslie looked up at him, and she smiled for the first time since she arrived, not out of politeness, but because she felt heard. The next morning, James woke up early. The coffee wasn't brewing yet. The water hadn't begun flowing through the machine, but he had already opened his laptop. Leslie was still fast asleep on the sofa, but he knew she could probably hear every sound outside. James sent an urgent email to the only 3 people he still trusted in the project: Reginald Villarreal, Stephanie Ramirez, and Dylan Wright, a security engineer he had spent months testing to find flaws in the network system. 3 hours later, they all gathered in the room James called the War Room. On the wall, the screen projected a map of every device planted throughout the house. The data traced signal origins, energy graphs, and latency trails, all automatically analyzed. Reginald brought another map. He laid it on the table, a floor plan of an unnamed building in downtown Atlanta. "It's here," he said. "The intermediary server to which all the in-house devices were transmitting. Officially listed as Norbridge Storage. In reality, an anonymous shell." James sat listening in silence. The enemy wasn't just Shelley. Behind her was someone bigger, more calculated, and more dangerous. "Do you suspect anyone else?" Dylan asked. James hesitated. In his mind, the image of Gabriel Molina surfaced as a partner, close friend, and the only one who knew about the custom backdoor James had personally built. "Not yet," James replied. "But if someone accessed my system protocol, it wasn't by chance." Dylan frowned. "There's one unfamiliar name in the access log, once last month and twice this past week." James nodded. "Let's track him again. As for Shelley, let her think we still trust her." That afternoon, James texted Shelley, "I'm working late, don't wait up." She replied quickly, "I'll bring you dinner, make sure you rest." James glanced at the screen. The tracking interface lit up with a familiar IP address. Shelley was using her signal scanner again. He exhaled. She was still at it, which meant someone else was pulling the strings. After Shelley left, James entered Leslie's room. She sketched a network map on paper, highlighting specific signal trace points with a marker. "What are you working on?" "Breaking down the camera signal cluster in the hallway," she said. "I'm using a map layer protocol to measure interference overlap." James looked at her anew. This girl wasn't just the one who discovered the cameras, she was part of the investigation. James held a small meeting with Reginald, Dylan, Stephanie, and Leslie. There was no conference table, just a wall etched with data and a projector screen. "We're up against something bigger now," James began. "I need to know one thing. Who can I trust and who's in?" Reginald nodded. Stephanie placed a hand on Leslie's shoulder. Dylan looked at James and asked, "Are you sure bringing Leslie into this is okay?" James didn't answer. Leslie spoke. "I've been in this game for a while. You're just seeing it now." A brief silence. Then Reginald broke it with a grin. "Welcome to the team." The war now had a team. A 10-year-old black girl was now walking alongside hardened operatives. And this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a battle for truth. The basement of James's estate had been transformed into a command center. Beneath cold white lights, tangled cables ran like veins of a living organism. Reginald set up a temporary standalone server wholly disconnected from the leading network dedicated solely to this secret investigation. They called it Zone Zero, the silent zone where no signal could escape. Leslie stood in the middle of that room, watching the data graphs dance. Though only 10, she moved among the equipment like she was born to do it. Dylan watched in amazement. This kid, he thought, will put veteran engineers to shame. "We'll start with Norbridge storage," James said. "Reginald, I need you to plant cameras around the building. Quietly, no traces." "You think we'll need a decoy signal?" Reginald asked. "Not yet. First, we need to know who they are and what they're pulling from us." Over the next 3 days, James's team traced every leaking signal packet. Dylan used a high-frequency pulse analyzer pulse splitter to break apart encrypted data clusters. Meanwhile, Leslie spotted something strange. Each packet carried the same digital signature, unrelated to any known system. "This signature's triple-layer encrypted," she said, pointing at the screen. "This isn't commercial. It's military protocol." James clenched his fist. "So someone has top-level access. Very top." Stephanie brought in coffee. She placed a hand on Leslie's shoulder, eyes concerned. "Are you sure you're okay, sweetheart?" Leslie nodded. "I'm better when I'm doing something." Reginald returned from his surveillance mission at Norbridge. He handed James a USB. "Cameras caught 2 unidentified individuals entering over the past 2 days, he said. "One of them had an ID from a financial firm, Novacore Capital." James opened the data. A face appeared clearly on the screen. Michael Jenkins, a senior finance director at Novacore, was the man who had opposed James's neuromesh project during an investment board hearing. "It's him," James said. "He's not just spying, he wants to steal everything." "Including Leslie," Stephanie said quietly, her eyes locked on Michael Jenkins' image. "If he knows she has access to the system—" "No one touches Leslie," James said. His voice was like cold steel. That evening, James and Leslie sat together. No data, no screens, just a man and a girl. James took out an old box, and inside was a piece of music he and his brother had written years ago. "Your father used to play this beautifully," James said, "but I never taught it to anyone." Leslie looked up. "Will you teach me?" James nodded. "Not so you can play it well, but so you remember you're human, not a tool." On the 6th day, the data stream abruptly stopped. Dylan checked and found the Norbridge server had been shut down. "They know we're watching," he said. James didn't panic. He looked at Leslie. "What do you think?" Leslie opened her laptop. She tapped in a few commands and said, "They didn't shut down. They moved the server, new IPs in the suburbs near a military research facility." The room went silent. Reginald whispered, "We're fighting something bigger than we thought." James stood. "We need a new plan." He walked to the whiteboard and wrote 2 large words with a black marker, Monarch Protocol. "What's that?" Dylan asked. James turned to the team. "An internal program. It was shut down 3 years ago for ethical violations. But I think it never died. They just buried it." "And what do we do?" Reginald asked. James turned to Leslie. "We dig it up. Every line of code, every person involved, every secret." Leslie nodded. Her eyes lit up, not from the thrill of the challenge, but from something more profound: justice. Saturday afternoon, Zone 0 was silent. Leslie constructed a simulated model of the system that Nova Core Capital might run from the residual data packets. She called it the Reflection Hub. It was where data harvested from James's estate was analyzed, tagged, and distributed to third parties. James stared at the model like a room full of monsters. "We're going to create bait," he said, "a fake project so enticing they can't resist." Dylan frowned. "What if they realize it's fake?" James shook his head. "We'll make them believe it's the one thing they haven't been able to control." Reginald added, "We need someone inside to feed the false lead to them." All eyes turned to James. Then he said what no one expected: "Shelley will do it." That evening, James invited Shelley to dinner at a familiar Italian restaurant. Candlelight flickered, red wine flowed, soft jazz played in the background. Everything felt like the old days. He crafted an intimate, nostalgic setting to stir memories of when they first fell in love. Shelley wore the black dress James had once given her. Her eyes sparkled. She suspected nothing. As the main course was served, James spoke. "I've been thinking about restarting NeuroMesh, but in an entirely new direction. Completely private, off the radar. I'm calling it Phantom Layer." Shelley looked up, feigning nonchalance, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. "Why are you telling me this?" James smiled softly. "Because you've always been the first person I wanted to share with." The next day, an unfamiliar signal appeared. Dylan confirmed they've taken the bait. Reginald immediately tracked the feedback packets. They didn't return to Norbridge, but were rerouted to a hidden IP at an industrial zone south of Atlanta. A site that appeared abandoned, but was actually under tight security. Leslie drew a structural map using satellite imagery. "We can't break in, but we can make them open the door." James asked, "How?" Leslie typed 2 words onto the screen: "reverse manipulation." The plan was launched that night. Leslie and Dylan crafted a false code segment, the Paradox Worm, capable of disrupting connections within the Monarch Protocol system if decrypted incorrectly. This code was embedded into the Phantom Layer file, disguised as top-secret data. Reginald prepared an external hard drive to simulate a technical leak. Inside, along with the false code, was a tiered map of the NeuroMesh architecture. James personally handed the drive to Shelley with a message: "I don't trust anyone anymore. But if this leaks, I'll know you were the last to touch it." Shelley stared at the drive, hesitating. But eventually, she took it. 36 hours later, Zone 0 registered an unusual ping. Dylan checked and found that a code had been improperly decrypted, and the Paradox Worm had been triggered. "They've bitten," Dylan said. "We have a 12-minute window before they realize." During that time, Leslie and Reginald launched a response packet, sending a signal back from the Monarch server, penetrating their system. What they retrieved left the room in stunned silence. A list of tech spies embedded in major corporations, covert investments from international funds into civilian surveillance systems, code names of internal moles including Gabriel Molina. James clenched his fist. "Gabriel, he's been betraying us for a long time." A strategy meeting was called that same night. James looked at them all and declared, "We can't keep this hidden anymore. We need to bring the truth to light, but do it right." Stephanie asked, "What about Shelley?" James replied, "Let her believe she's still in control." Leslie interjected, "We can set another trap about a secret meeting this time. A Phantom Layer deals with the government." Reginald nodded. "They'll show up, and when they do, we'll greet them with a data barrage." In an old lakeside high-rise, they staged the fake meeting. Dylan and Reginald posed as foreign investors. James played the role of a tech exec, willing to sell to the highest bidder. The entire scene, audio and video, were recorded and broadcast stealthily onto an immutable blockchain. Michael Jenkins showed up in person. "We want full access," he said. James smiled as if everything was going perfectly. "We want the right price and the right silence." James triggered the final command as the deal unfolded mirror fall, uploading the entire exchange to 12 international platforms in 6 seconds. The next morning, global media exploded with reports on Monarch Protocol. The Federal Security Commission launched an investigation. Nova Core Capital's accounts were frozen. Michael Jenkins was arrested at the airport trying to flee the country. James stood by the window on the 36th floor, looking down over the city. Leslie walked beside him, holding the old painting they had once taken down. The frame was now repaired, its scratch preserved like a scar. "Are we going to hang it back up?" she asked. James nodded, not to hide anything, but to remember we didn't get devoured. 3 days after the Monarch Protocol story exploded across global media, the atmosphere in James Hall's estate turned strange, both light and heavy. The masterminds had been exposed, but no one in the group believed the game was over. Leslie was the first to speak. She sat cross-legged in front of the surveillance screen, flipping through her notebook. "Something's wrong. Everything's gone too smoothly." Dylan agreed. "They haven't retaliated. Not a single effort to push back after Mirror Fall detonated. With stakes this high, we should have seen something." Reginald tapped the map on the wall. "They want us to think they've lost." James returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Shelley's gone silent. Gabriel too. It's possible." Stephanie entered the room with a thick grey envelope. "Hand-delivered letter. No sender. It's for Leslie." The room fell silent. Leslie carefully opened the envelope. Inside was no letter. Just a small red USB and a folded slip of paper. "This is only the beginning." James tensed. "Don't plug it into anything here." They immediately brought it to Zone 0 and inserted it into an air-gapped machine. It contained only one video file. On screen was Shelley seated calmly, her expression chillingly composed. "Leslie," her voice rang out, "you're brilliant, but you think it's over." A faint smile. "What you saw was only one piece of the board. Monarch was just an arm. The brain lives on. James doesn't understand this, but you might, because you were born from the system we once dreamed of. And you will become the center of the next chapter." The video ended. No one spoke. James looked at Leslie, still seated unmoving. Her eyes weren't afraid, just calm. Dylan broke the silence. "They're targeting you. They know your potential." Leslie nodded. "I know, and I don't plan to hide." Reginald asked, "So what do we do next?" Leslie picked up a marker and drew a closed spiral on the whiteboard. "We lure them into the light, but this time we don't use bait. We use me." James stood up abruptly. "No, I won't let you do that." Leslie looked him in the eye, unwavering. "I don't need to be saved. I need to be trusted." The second plan began. Dylan found a digital signal embedded between frames of Shelley's video just 0.4 seconds long, containing a strange code sequence. After decoding, they discovered coordinates to a military satellite system operating in Eastern Europe, once contracted for deep AI analysis. James was alarmed. "They've cloned Monarch, and they're training a new version based on Leslie's data." Leslie whispered, "I'm the original model." Reginald said, "This isn't just surveillance anymore. It's social manipulation." An emergency meeting in Zone 0. "We can't take down a global system alone," Dylan said. "We need someone with authority and a reason to act." James paused for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a name buried deep in his past. David Roberts, former co-founder of his old company, now a defense security advisor in Brussels. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, James said, "He'll help, but only if we have undeniable proof that Monarch 2.0 is operational." Leslie stood silently, then pulled another USB from her jacket pocket. I extracted a sample from last week's response packet. They tried to replicate me, but their model always fails at syncing the heartbeat rhythm. That's the flaw. The next morning, the team flew to Brussels. Leslie brought a system replica. They were taken to an underground facility where David Roberts waited. He looked much older, but his eyes were still sharp. "She's the origin?" he asked. James nodded. "They didn't just create AI based on her, they're building a generation of decision-making systems, manipulating finance, media, and politics." David was silent, then looked at Leslie. "Are you afraid?" She replied calmly. "I've lost my parents. I'm not afraid of losing more. I'm afraid of people losing everything and not knowing why." David turned to James. "I'll open the door." Monarch 2.0 data was submitted to an international analytics platform. 1 week later, a temporary alliance of 5 nations was formed to investigate. The world began to learn the name Leslie Beck, not as a victim, but as the one who exposed the most dangerous AI system ever built. James stood on a balcony, watching Leslie respond to interview questions on screen. Her gaze was steady, unshaken. Stephanie stood beside him and whispered, "She's no longer the little girl who first came here." James nodded. "She's a warning and a hope." As the revelations around Monarch 2.0 spread, something strange happened. Governments, corporations, even human rights groups reacted slowly. Media coverage trickled. Only a few small agencies dared go deep. The powerful names remained eerily silent, as if the world had made an unspoken agreement. Don't disturb, the hellish gate just opened. Leslie noticed it first. "Truth isn't enough to move this world," she said, watching a news broadcast cut off halfway. "We need to show them what's really at stake." James turned to her. "What do you mean? I think we haven't shown them what's truly threatened." They decided to trace the origin of the Leslie simulation dataset, known as the Core Echo, to see who approved it, who funded it, and who kept silent. Dylan followed a financial trail from a suspicious fund transfer in Geneva. Reginald flew to Zurich under a false identity meeting with a private bank executive who had once managed an anonymous account marked ECL 779. The result, a list of 7 names including a Security Council member, 2 telecom CEOs, and a senior official at the World Health Organization. James threw the file onto the table. "And they'll do anything to stop this truth from spreading." Leslie didn't flinch. "They don't need to be persuaded. They need to be forced to respond." A closed-door meeting occurred between James's team and the International Analytics Alliance representatives. David Roberts chaired. "We're releasing the rest of the data," James proposed. "All surveillance mechanisms, all behavioral manipulation models, even the artificial emotion simulations." One delegate objected. "That will trigger global panic." David Roberts interrupted. "Not global panic. Panic among those who built it." Meanwhile, Leslie began receiving anonymous messages. Not threats, not hate, just invitations. Someone calling themselves Owl repeatedly sent encrypted puzzles, high-tier code problems only experts would recognize. "They're recruiting her," Dylan said. "They don't want her to be a breaker. They want her to help build the next one." Leslie gave a faint smile. "But I don't build anything that doesn't include people." A shocking event occurred that night. The entire Monarch dataset was deleted from the Alliance's central server. Not hacked, but erased from within. Only one message was left. "Not everyone wants the truth." James was furious. "They still have insiders, and they're winning again." Stephanie stepped forward, hand on his shoulder. "We haven't lost. Not as long as Leslie's still standing." To counter-strike, James chose to go fully public without intermediaries or filters. Leslie and Dylan built a data platform called Glass Signal. It is fully transparent, has no edits allowed, no ads, and no algorithm-based sorting. They released the data in parts, starting with election manipulation mechanisms, then migration surveillance, followed by social emotion override, a system that reprogrammed crowd emotions through digital behavior. This time, the silence broke, resignations erupted, emergency hearings convened. Financial giants saw mass withdrawals. In the middle of this quake, Leslie chose to step back. She asked James to let her mute herself for a while, no interviews, statements, or spotlight. "I've been the voice," she said. "Now I need to be the observer." James understood. Sometimes the one who knows the most must be the quietest. One autumn morning, James stepped onto the balcony and saw Leslie reading an old book, The Rebellion of Algorithms, its print faded, spine worn. "What's next for you?" he asked. Leslie closed the book and looked up. "Not to let them define me as the end of a cycle. I'll be the beginning of a new order." James nodded, his eyes narrowing like he was staring at a star too close. As the world began to see Leslie as a symbol of technological resistance, another group began to surface, nameless and undocumented, leaving traces in every extracted data stream, every disrupted transaction, and every unraveled algorithm. They called themselves the ones outside the light. Leslie first discovered them while checking the glass signal system. A strange data string had been inserted into the open code, not to damage it, but as if to leave a sign: "We stand with you." Dylan was cautious. Could be a trap, but Leslie didn't think so. No one attacks by leaving a promise. James nodded, still wary. "We need to know who they are." 3 days later, Leslie received a message from an anonymous account with triple-layer encryption beyond any public code Dylan had ever handled. They know about the original reflection. And they have a part of it. The original reflection, initial data describing Leslie's genuine emotions during early neuromesh tests. It was the monarch's soul and the artificial nightmare's origin. "We never managed to recover that file," James said, gripping his coffee mug. "If someone has it, they can reshape or destroy the entire system." "And if they choose to destroy it," Stephanie asked, "then humanity loses the only mirror it ever built to reflect itself truly." James murmured. They decided to respond. Leslie wrote a return code using her heartbeat pattern from when she was first tricked into wearing a tracking device, a form of emotional signature only she could possess. The reply came 10 minutes later with a hidden link requesting a personal connection, not from a device, but directly from Leslie. Reginald arranged the meeting place, an abandoned library on the edge of a forest in southern Georgia. No signal, no network, no digital history. James objected. "You're not going alone." Leslie agreed, but with a condition: "You're not allowed to speak for me." The meeting happened under the dim glow of a single working ceiling bulb. 3 masked figures appeared, one male, one female, and one of unknown gender. They introduced themselves. "We are what remains of honesty in the artificial age." They confirmed possession of a copy of the original reflection. But what shocked James and Dylan was their following statement: "We're not keeping it to threaten. We're letting Leslie decide." Leslie asked, "Why me?" The woman replied, "Because you were the first being whose emotions were digitized. If you choose to continue, humanity enters a deeper age of control. If you choose to stop, it all disappears." Leslie was silent for a long time. Finally, she asked, "If I choose to stop, can we start again, without control, without reflection?" The man nodded. "It won't be easy, but it will be real." Leslie looked at James. He said nothing, only placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent vow. Hours later, Leslie sat alone in Zone 0 before the decryption device. In her hand was the drive containing the original reflection. She could input the activation code, reactivate the entire system, improve it, and make it more transparent. Or she could enter the destruction sequence. And she chose. The next morning, the world received a quiet message from Glass Signal: "The mirror has shattered. From now on, we look at each other with our own eyes." Monarch collapsed completely. No one controlled collective emotions anymore. No more simulations. No more automated behavioral adjustments. People returned to their purest instinct to feel. James sat in a chair, watching Leslie step into the backyard, remove her headphones, close her laptop, and inhale the crisp early winter air. You didn't just break a system, James said. You gave humanity back its soul. Leslie smiled. Sometimes to start again, you must silence all the old echoes. 3 weeks after Monarch's full collapse, the world experienced an unprecedented quiet. No more behavior-guiding algorithms. No more sense of being watched with every move. The massive platforms that once relied on emotional data for profit became sluggish, directionless. James called it the honest void, not chaos, but a silence humanity was unfamiliar with. Leslie, however, thrived in that void as if it were her natural element. One early morning, Leslie brought a stack of notes to the old neighborhood where she'd once lived with her parents, now mainly demolished, reduced to bare concrete and broken poles. "Why are we here?" James asked, holding a cup of hot coffee. "To remember that all data began with real people," she answered. "This place used to be a memory. No need to encode it." She pulled a small device from her backpack, a simple sensor system to record wind movement, ambient sounds and temperature. It didn't send to any server. Didn't store in the cloud. It only existed right there in the moment. "I call it White Echo," Leslie said. "A system that remembers nothing but the moment it lives in." News of White Echo spread quickly, not by algorithms. People began building similar devices, non-encoding sensors, in parks, school gardens, and even children's bedrooms. Not for surveillance, not for storage, but to create a feeling that we are living in the present. Reginald called it quiet infrastructure, a new foundation not serving optimization, but truth. Elsewhere, Dylan and Stephanie started a special class, Rewrite Emotions. They invited children to write letters, draw pictures, and express feelings by hand, no machines involved. One 8-year-old boy wrote, "I used to know Mum was sad from the sad face on the screen. Now I know she's sad when she skips breakfast." James read the letter with visible emotion. "We've gone far," he said, "and in the end, we had to return to learn the language of being human again." Leslie no longer appeared much in public, but those who met her spoke of a calm girl, often carrying an old film camera and a blank notebook. No one knew what she photographed. No one knew what she wrote, and maybe that was right. One night, James received an email with no subject line from an untraceable address. Inside a single sentence, "A tomorrow without encryption is the first day we trust without proof." He smiled, knowing exactly who had sent it. James was invited to speak at a tech conference about the future of AI after Monarch. He said only, "The world doesn't lack technology. It lacks people who know when to stop." He left the stage to applause, but his eyes weren't on the crowd. He looked upward, where the clouds weren't being watched for the first time in years, and the sunlight wasn't being tagged. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the entrance to James Hall, the once bustling mansion, now left with only a few weather displays and a wooden sign that read, "No signal is also a kind of peace." Leslie rose early daily, walking the hill behind the house with her worn film camera and a charcoal pencil. She no longer needed to answer to the press, nor did institutions chase her for keynote speeches. She had given the world a chance and was now giving herself silence. James understood. He didn't ask questions or request her presence at tech reform meetings, though her name remained central to every agenda. He left a thermos of hot ginger tea on the steps each morning with a handwritten note, "If you need someone to listen, I'm here." One clear morning, Leslie returned from her walk carrying an old envelope wrapped in newspaper. No sender, just a scrawled phrase for the last one who remembers. Inside was a weathered leather notebook, frayed at the spine. On the first page, a symbol, the double spiral once used in the Monarch protocol. Leslie flipped through the pages, but what she found wasn't data or code, it was a journal. Handwritten entries from someone who had been part of Monarch's original development team. They described why the system was created not to control, but to help humans understand one another in a divided world. "We forgot that every piece of technology begins with good intent," the writer noted. "We just didn't know how to stop when trust ceased to be a standard." Leslie closed her eyes. Cold wind brushed her collar, but inside something softened. That day, she took the journal to the Western Hill where her parents used to bring her as a child. She dug a slight hollow in the earth, placed the notebook inside, covered it with dry leaves, and marked the spot with a unique symbol on a paper map. Not to bury it, she said, but for someone to find when ready. James watched from afar as she bent down, layering the earth. He didn't step closer, didn't interrupt the moment. A while later, Leslie returned, strolling as if carrying something restored. "You okay?" James asked. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "But I think I'm real." In the final weeks of the year, something unusual began to spread. Not a new wave of tech, not a viral social trend, but quiet acts. People began writing letters again. Schools hosted no electronics days. Programmers created software that collected no data. Some cities piloted free emotion zones, spaces without cameras, Wi-Fi, and just people and time. Leslie was invited to one such place, a newly opened park in Vermont, but she didn't go. Instead, she sent a small box with 2 items, a hand-drawn paper map and a film photo of the hill by her home, where the sunrise broke through soft mist. The photo was blurry, but everyone said it was the most beautiful image they'd ever seen. James, Stephanie, Dylan, and Reginald sat around the kitchen table on New Year's Eve. No laptops, no photos, just stories, tea, and wind brushing against the glass. Near midnight, Leslie entered wearing a knit sweater and carrying a small candle. "We could light this instead of counting down," she said. They agreed. The candle was placed at the center of the table. Silence followed. When the hour struck midnight, there were no fireworks, no bells. Just a small flame, warm, steady, and real.